The moment Sandra Voss stepped into the jetway at Charles de Gaulle, her left shoe made a sound that no real flight attendant would ever allow. A faint, crystalline shift beneath the insole. The kind that comes not from a pebble or a coin, but from 43 uncut diamonds sealed inside a thin acetate pouch, each one wrapped in a single layer of tissue paper by hands that had trembled the entire time. She had practiced the walk for 11 days. In her apartment in the 11th arrondissement, a place that smelled of old radiators and the particular loneliness of someone who used to have more. She had walked circuits around the dining table in the replica shoes, counting her steps, calibrating her heel strike, learning to move in a way that kept the pouch flat and the stones still. Her neighbor below, an elderly man named Gerard who had never once complained about anything in 4 years, had knocked on the door on day 3 and asked, very gently, if everything was all right. She had said yes. She had meant it in the way that people mean things when they have already decided. Air Liberté Flight 7714 departed Paris at 6:42 in the evening, bound for Dubai International, a route popular with business travelers, gem merchants, and precisely the kind of wealthy, distracted passengers who rarely looked twice at the crew. The Airbus A330 sat wide and half full on the tarmac, the sky behind the terminal streaked with the particular bruised orange of a European autumn dusk, the kind of light that makes even airports look briefly beautiful and then doesn't. Gate 41C smelled of jet fuel and the ghost of someone's croissant, and the boarding gate speakers were cycling through a hold music selection that Sandra had identified, during her reconnaissance visit 2 weeks earlier, as the same 4 songs on a loop. She smoothed the navy polyester blazer, a convincing replica of Air Liberté's uniform, sourced from a theatrical costumer in Lyon named Philippe who had not asked questions because she had paid in cash, and fixed her posture at the forward galley door. The blazer had the correct piping on the cuffs. The lanyard held a crew ID that had cost her 4,000 euros from a man she had met through her ex-husband's cousin, which was the kind of chain of connections that should have been a warning and wasn't. She was 41 years old, with sun-weathered cheekbones and the kind of jawline that suggested she had once been told she was beautiful and had made a career of leveraging it. Her dark hair was pulled back in the regulation chignon, secured with the same clip style she had identified in 47 separate photographs of Air Liberté crew members on professional networking sites. Her makeup was calibrated precisely to airline specifications. Coverage foundation, no drama, a lipstick in a shade called corporate blush that she had found, after 3 drugstore trips, matched the color worn by the senior cabin crew in the carrier's promotional materials. She wore the regulation black quartz, half a size too small because the theatrical costumer supplier had run short of 10s. This is why the diamonds shifted when she walked. This is the detail that would end everything. The contact in Antwerp had introduced himself only as Mark, which was almost certainly not his name, and he had the particular blandness of someone who had made a professional decision to be forgettable. He had been clear across 2 meetings in a cafe near Central Station about the mechanics. The shipment never touches your hands directly. The pouch is pre-sealed. You board at CDG with the positioning crew. Air Liberté runs a crew change on 7714 every Tuesday. 3 members deadheading to Dubai for a layover rotation. You're in the manifest as a charter edition from a subcontracted ground service. Customs at CDG never screens cabin personnel on this carrier. We've confirmed this over 6 months. You exit at DXB with the crew. Walk to arrivals. Car will be at exit 7. He had made it sound like collecting dry cleaning. Sandra had believed him because she needed to believe him, because the apartment in the 11th had a second mortgage that was 3 months behind, because her ex-husband had taken the savings account and the car in the years, because 43 diamonds at current market represented 460,000 euros, of which her share was 80,000, which was enough to start over in a way that felt like forward motion rather than freefall. She tucked herself into the forward galley and began laying out the pre-departure service cart with the methodical efficiency of someone who had watched approximately 9 hours of YouTube tutorials titled things like A Day in the Life of a Flight Attendant and Everything They Don't Tell You About Cabin Crew Work. She had taken notes. She had a notebook, actually, in the small crew bag on her shoulder, filled with procedural details and phonetic pronunciations of the Air Liberté service scripts in both French and English. She had been, in another life, a secondary school French teacher. She was good at preparation. She was good at the performance of competence. The real crew filed in behind her. They did not look like Interpol agents. This was, of course, the point. Chief Cabin Officer Miriam Osei had spent 31 years in various configurations of law enforcement and international investigation, the last 14 months embedded with Lion Interpol's Transnational Property Crimes Unit undercover as a senior cabin officer for Air Liberté, a role she had inhabited so completely that she had begun to genuinely enjoy the job, the physical rhythm of it, the particular satisfaction of a well-run service, the way passengers who were frightened during turbulence visibly calmed when they heard her voice. She was 52 years old, with reading glasses perpetually perched on her head and a laugh that could cross 8 rows of economy seating, and she greeted Sandra with the exact warmth of a senior colleague meeting a new charter edition. A smile, a handshake, a brief orientation of the galley layout. "The service cart goes wheels forward on this aircraft," she said pleasantly, noting the direction Sandra had positioned it. "Little different from the charter config." Sandra adjusted the cart. That was the first small error, a real crew addition even from a charter subcontractor would have known. Miriam logged it privately and continued laying out the welcome drinks. Flight attendant Theo Mancini was 29 years old and had the lean, contained efficiency of someone who ran half marathons on his weekends off and spent the rest of his time embedded in operations that required him to be entirely uninteresting to look at. He had spent 3 years with Interpol's Operational Support Division before the Lion Unit had recruited him for precisely this assignment, based in part on his genuine flight service certification. He had trained as cabin crew at 22 before pivoting to investigations, and in part on his ability to be, as his unit chief had put it, the least memorable person in any room he enters. He took his position at the rear galley, began his pre-departure inventory, and clocked Sandra's shoes in the first 4 minutes. Not the style, the gait, the micro-adjustment she made with every left foot strike, the way her weight distributed half a beat too carefully, as if she were carrying something fragile in a place that shouldn't hold anything fragile. He sent Miriam a 3-word message on the encrypted crew communication tablet that Air Liberté issued to all cabin staff. Left foot. Watch. The passenger cabin held 189 seats and 104 occupied bodies in various states of pre-departure preparation. In 14A, a Zurich commodities broker named Don Hartmann, 55, silver-templed, wearing a blazer that had been cut by someone in Milan, had his laptop open before the boarding door closed and was reviewing a spreadsheet with the focused disengagement of a man who had taken this flight 40 times and experienced it as a commute rather than a journey. In 27C, a French grandmother named Colette Barreau, 73, had arranged her neck pillow, her reading glasses, her paperback novel, and her small zippered pouch of travel medications on the tray table with the careful geometry of someone who understood that the difference between a tolerable long-haul flight and a miserable one was organization. Across the aisle in 27B, her 12-year-old granddaughter Ines was already watching something on an iPad with the boneless, gravity-defying posture of a child who had not yet learned to sit like an adult. In 31E, near the rear, a young Emirati man named Khalid al-Rashidi was listening to something through wireless earbuds and periodically laughing at it, softly to himself. These 4 would remember this flight for the rest of their lives. The captain's voice came over the intercom. A baritone named Capitaine René 4, measured and warm and carrying the particular unhurried authority of someone who had logged 22,000 hours and found nothing left to prove. Running through the departure sequence as the aircraft began its slow hydraulic crawl toward runway 27R. The engines found their idle note. The safety demonstration began. Sandra stood at her forward position and performed the seatbelt demonstration she had practiced in her apartment mirror 16 times. And it was almost right, except that she used her left hand first where regulation specified right, and Miriam, watching from the galley threshold, filed this also. The aircraft lifted at 6:49 p.m. Sandra Voss exhaled slowly through her nose. Her shoe shifted. 20 minutes after takeoff, climbing through 18,000 feet above the darkening coastline of southern France where the Rhône met the sea in the last of the evening light, Sandra moved through the business cabin with the orange juice service and encountered Don Hartmann in 14A. "Sir, can I get you something to drink?" The syntax fractured mid-sentence, recovered, and landed wrong. Not spectacularly wrong. Not the kind of wrong that makes a passenger look up and say that was odd. Just the kind of wrong that happens when a person is simultaneously managing a memorized script, a physical performance, 43 diamonds in their shoe, and the low continuous hum of fear that had been running beneath everything for 11 days like a frequency just past hearing. Don Hartmann said, "OJ, please," without looking up. Sandra poured it. Her hands were entirely steady, which was either the product of 11 days of preparation or the particular steadiness that arrives when a person has committed so completely to a course of action that the anxiety has nowhere left to go and simply becomes stillness. Theo, coming from the opposite direction with the water service, heard the syntax break. He did not look at Sandra. He looked at the middle distance in the way of a crew member performing routine service, and he continued forward, and he sent Miriam a second message, verbal pattern inconsistency. Script-based, not trained. Miriam received it in the galley, where she was preparing the hot towel service, and she folded a towel and said nothing. The aircraft reached its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet over the Mediterranean. The cabin lights dimmed to the amber half-dark of cruise service. Passengers settled. Laptop screens glowed. Colette Barreau opened her novel. Ines fell asleep against the window with her iPad still running, the screen casting a small rectangle of blue light across her cheek. Don Hartmann ordered a second orange juice and began annotating his spreadsheet with a physical pen, which struck Sandra when she brought it as an oddly old-fashioned thing to do, and she thought about this for a moment because thinking about small things was easier than thinking about the pouch in her shoe, which had begun, in the last 20 minutes, to feel less like a concealment and more like a weight. The turbulence, when it came, was announced by nothing. At 31,000 feet over the darkened water between Sardinia and the Libyan coast, the aircraft hit a pocket of moderate clear air turbulence, the kind that doesn't register on radar until you're inside it, a brief muscular shudder in the fuselage, the specific sensation of falling without falling, of the floor briefly becoming a question. In the cabin, passengers gripped armrests. Colette Barreau's reading glasses slid from her face. Khalid al-Rashidi grabbed his earbuds. Don Hartmann's pen rolled toward the aisle. Sandra was standing in the aisle at row 16, 3 steps from the nearest armrest. When the turbulence hit, she stepped sideways. Her left foot came down at the wrong angle for the wrong shoe, and the heel skidded on the aisle carpet, and she went down hard onto her left knee, catching the edge of the seat armrest with her right hand, which stopped the fall but did not stop the shoe. The left quart came half off her foot. The acetate pouch, which the man in Antwerp had described as professionally sealed, and which had in fact been sealed with a heat gun that had been applied for 2 seconds too few on the left seam because the man who did it had been watching football at the time, split. 3 diamonds rolled into the Isle of Air Liberté Flight 7714. They were not large stones, raw, uncut, averaging 4 carats, but they were specific in the way diamonds are specific, catching the amber cruise lighting with a sharpness and a multiplicity that ordinary objects do not possess. They caught it and threw it back in 3 directions simultaneously, and the effect was brief and small and absolutely unmistakable. Ines Barreau, 12 years old, asleep against the window 3 rows back, was woken by the turbulence, and in the first unguarded second of her waking looked directly down the aisle at the 3 points of refracted light, and said, in the clear, carrying, unedited voice of a child who has not yet learned to perform uncertainty, Grandmere SEK say to diamonds? Colette Barreau looked up from retrieving her reading glasses. Don Hartmann looked up from his spreadsheet, pen still in hand. Khalid al-Rashidi, 3 rows behind, removed 1 earbud. Sandra Voss, on one knee on the aisle carpet, looked at the 3 stones, looked at the aisle ahead of them and behind them, looked at her shoe, made the decision she would spend the following years of her life regretting, because it was the only decision she could make in that moment and it was entirely the wrong one. She reached for them. Miriam Osei had been 4 rows forward and was already moving. She came from the direction of the galley with the absolute, unhurried authority of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment and has decided in advance that she will not hurry it, because hurrying suggests uncertainty and she has none. She wore her reading glasses on her head. She stepped over Sandra's outstretched hand, not around it, over it, a small and deliberate choreography, and crouched in the aisle with the ease of someone who did yoga on her layovers and meant it, and she picked up all 3 stones in the palm of her left hand. She held them up toward the overhead lighting. She examined them with the focused attention of someone looking at something she recognized. The examination took 4 seconds. Sandra, she said. Her voice had the quality of a door that closes precisely. Not slammed, not drifted, but placed into its frame with the exact pressure required to latch it completely. Please stand up and come with me. Those, I don't know what those are. They were on the floor, I think someone. Sandra, She lowered her voice a quarter register. Not unkind. Simply final. Please don't. Sandra stood. The shoe gaped from her foot. The remaining stones in the split pouch shifted against each other, producing a sound soft, musical, completely wrong for an aircraft aisle, that Theo heard from row 19, where he had positioned himself with the practiced casualness of someone adjusting an overhead bin. He met Miriam's eyes. She gave him the small nod that in 14 months of collaboration had come to mean, proceed as planned. Colette Barreau from 27C watched the senior attendant guide the younger woman firmly toward the forward galley with her hand placed at the exact center of Sandra's back, and said very quietly to Ines, who was now fully awake and watching, "Stay in your seat." "But what's happening, Grandmere?" Colette considered this. "Something that needed to happen," she said, and opened her novel again, though she did not read it. Don Hartmann set his pen on the tray table and watched the galley curtain close. He then opened a new tab on his laptop and typed in the search bar Air Liberté Flight 7714, and then closed the tab because there was no information yet, and also because he recognized, with the instinct of a man who dealt in commodities, that whatever was happening in that galley was not his business, and also that it was very much his business as a witness, and these two things sat beside each other in him for the rest of the flight. The forward galley of an Airbus A330 measures, in its usable floor space, roughly 2 meters by 2 meters. It is bounded on 3 sides by equipment bays, the coffee module, the chiller units, the storage panels for service equipment, and on the 4th by the curtain that separates it from the business cabin. When Miriam Osei stepped inside it with Sandra Voss and drew the curtain closed, it became a room. A small one, with no windows, in which 2 women stood with 43 diamonds between them in one form or another, and the aircraft continued its passage above the dark Mediterranean at 38,000 feet. And the engines held their note, and time moved differently than it does on the ground. Theo took a position outside the curtain, service tablet in hand, presenting to the cabin as a crew member completing routine documentation. He had positioned himself to block the sight line from row 14 to the galley entrance, which was not accidental. Inside, Miriam set the 3 diamonds on the metal counter between them. They caught the galley's fluorescent light, harsher than the cabin amber, clinical, honest, and sat there without drama. She reached into the inner breast pocket of her uniform jacket, the pocket that on working crew holds the crew ID card and a folded emergency procedures card, and she produced a credential wallet. She opened it and placed it on the counter beside the diamonds. International Criminal Police Organization, Secretariat General de Lyon, Analyst Principali, Crimes Transnationaux contre les Biens. The seal embossed in gold tone above the text. The photograph below it, the same face, same reading glasses perched on top, was unmistakably the woman standing across the counter from Sandra Voss. The name read Osei, Miriam A. The ID number and verification code would, if Sandra had had the composure to check, have resolved correctly in the Interpol I-24/7 database. Sandra stared at it for 12 seconds. She counted them afterward, because they were the last 12 seconds in which any version of the story she had been telling herself remained structurally possible. "I need you to remove your left shoe," Miriam said. "I have rights," Sandra said. Her voice had not broken. She was still, in this moment, holding the shape of the person she had practiced being. "You do," Miriam said. "You have the right to remain silent under applicable law. You have the right to legal representation. You will be informed formally of your rights by the UAE Federal Public Prosecution Liaison, who will meet us at Dubai International. I will ensure that happens correctly." She paused. "Those are your rights. I am telling you them now because I want you to know them. I am also telling you that I need you to remove your left shoe, and that this will go more simply if you do it here than if we wait." Sandra sat down on the jump seat. It was the only place to sit. She removed the shoe. She held it in both hands for a moment, the black court half a size too small, the source of everything, and then she set it on the counter. The split seam of the pouch opened as she tilted it. 40 stones came out. They came out in a cascade that was, despite everything, beautiful, the way water falling from a height is beautiful, the way anything in free motion catches light. They scattered across the metal counter, and some reached the lip, and Miriam caught them in her cupped palm without urgency and counted them, later as 40. 3 were already on the counter from the aisle. 43 total, matching the manifest from the Antwerp interception 14 months ago. Miriam looked at the stones for a long moment. "Who is your contact?" she asked. The Antwerp sighed. "I want a lawyer." "You'll have one." Miriam picked up the largest stone, raw, roughly octahedral, the kind of uncut diamond that takes imagination to see as what it will eventually become, and held it to the light. "These are from the Jwaneng pipeline in Botswana. Conflict adjacent. The mining operation was flagged 18 months ago by the Kimberley Process Monitoring Body. We've been following this particular batch since the primary courier was intercepted in Johannesburg." Sandra's head came up. "You've been following the diamonds." "We've been following the shipment, yes. Since Botswana. Through Antwerp. Through 2 couriers who are already in custody in Belgium." Miriam set the stone down. "We didn't know the 3rd carrier would be you. We identified you in Lyon, when your name appeared in the Charter Manifest edition at CDG. We ran you in 4 hours." The silence in the galley had a texture to it. The engine sound, the recycled air, the particular quality of a confined space in which something true has just been said. "The contact," Miriam said again, "not pressuring, simply persistent." "Mark," Sandra said. "That's the only name I have." She stopped. "I don't have an address. We met in a cafe. He paid me in cryptocurrency to a wallet I don't control. I've never seen him again." She looked at her hands. "I think you already know all of this." "Most of it," Miriam said. "The wallet we know. Mark we have a description of." She began, methodically, to count the stones into an evidence bag she produced from the same interior pocket. "We'll need a full statement. That will happen in Dubai." She sealed the bag. "For what it's worth," she said, and her tone shifted very slightly, in the direction of something that was not quite sympathy but was adjacent to it. "The people who set this up are very practiced at finding people who need money badly enough to not ask questions. That is not an excuse. But it is a context." Sandra said nothing. "The uniform was very convincing," Miriam continued in the same tone. "The accessories were correct. The hair, the makeup, the service script was close." She paused, setting the evidence bag aside. "The shoes were the problem. Crew always break in their shoes. For years of standing on aircraft, your feet know where the weight goes. Yours were protecting something." Theo made the announcement on the cabin address system in a voice calibrated to situation resolved. "Nothing to worry about. Ladies and gentlemen, we experienced a brief service interruption in the forward cabin which has been fully resolved. We extend our apologies for any disruption. Cruise service will resume shortly, and we will begin our approach into Dubai International in approximately 22 minutes. The local time in Dubai is currently 11:04 in the evening. The temperature on the ground is 28 degrees. On behalf of Capitaine 4 and the entire Air Liberté crew, thank you for your patience." Don Hartmann looked up from his laptop. He had written nothing in the past 18 minutes. He looked at the galley curtain, which remained closed. He looked back at his spreadsheet. He pressed save. Colette Barreau folded a corner of her novel page down and looked at her granddaughter. Ines had her knees pulled up, iPad resting on them, watching the galley curtain. "Are they arresting her?" Ines asked. "I expect so," Colette said. "Because of the diamonds? Because of what she was doing with them?" Ines thought about this. Was she scared? Colette picked up her novel. "I imagine she was scared for quite a long time before tonight," she said. "That's usually how it works." Khalid al-Rashidi, in 31E, had replaced his earbud and was no longer laughing at whatever he'd been listening to. He was looking out the window at the absolute dark over the sea and thinking about the attendant's face when she went down in the aisle, the specific expression of a person who knows, in the half-second after a thing happens, that the thing they most feared has arrived, and he felt something for her that was not quite pity and not quite judgment and did not have a clean name. Dubai International at 11:31 p.m. was, as it always was, a city pretending to be an airport. Vast, illuminated, humming with the transit of 3 continents at once. Gate C-47 received Air Liberté 7714 with the ordinary mechanics of arrival, jetway extending, door seals releasing, the exhalation of pressurized air, and then, before the seatbelt sign had completed its chime, for figures moved to the aircraft door from the gate side. 2 Emirates Customs and Border Protection officers in their dark uniforms. 1 representative from the Interpol National Central Bureau Dubai, a Jordanian woman named Lara Khoury who had coordinating on this operation from the Dubai side for 3 months, and who shook Miriam's hand in the jetway with the restrained satisfaction of someone completing a long-distance relay. And 1 officer from the UAE Federal Public Prosecution Authority, who was there to ensure that Sandra Voss's rights under UAE and applicable international law were formally stated and observed, because Interpol operates within the law or it does not operate. Sandra Voss walked off the aircraft before any other passenger. She was in 1 shoe. She had been asked if she would like to carry the other and she had said no. And this small refusal was the only act of agency she exercised in the 23 minutes between the galley and the prosecution authority officer reading her the formal notification of charges. She walked down the jetway with Miriam beside her and Lara Khoury 1 step behind, and she did not look back at the aircraft. The charges, as filed under UAE Federal Law No. 43 of 2006 concerning combating money laundering and Section 14 of the Civil Aviation Law, were 3. Smuggling of unregistered controlled commodities, forgery of a civil aviation crew identification document, and impersonation of a licensed civil aviation employee. The Interpol diffusion notice to Belgian Federal Police, requesting the identification and detention of the individual known as Mark in connection with the broader Juaning pipeline operation, was transmitted at 12:17 a.m. Dubai time. The name Sandra provided, the cafe near Central Station, the description, the cryptocurrency wallet address, was not enough on its own. It was, however, sufficient as a 3rd corroborating data point alongside information from the 2 couriers already in Belgian custody. By 7 a.m. Brussels time, Belgian Federal Police had identified an individual named Marcus here, a 46-year-old Dutch national with a previous fraud conviction in the Netherlands and ties to an Antwerp-based gem brokering operation that Kimberley process monitors had flagged 2 years earlier. He was detained at his apartment in Mechelen while making coffee. The evidence room in Dubai Airport's law enforcement suite was beige and fluorescent and smelled of the particular cleanliness of rooms that are regularly cleaned because difficult things happen in them. The 43 diamonds were logged by weight, photograph, and serial identification on a Kimberley process chain of custody form. Each stone numbered, bagged, and entered into an evidence chain that would eventually return them, after legal proceedings in both the UAE and Belgium, to the Botswana government's mineral authority, to whom they legally belonged. Miriam Osei completed her incident report in the crew hotel at 1:08 a.m. A cup of coffee going cold beside her laptop and the Dubai skyline enormous and bright through the window in the particular way of cities that do not dim at night. She noted in the operational observations section that courier recruitment methodology had evolved. This was the 3rd documented instance of a non-professional carrier using counterfeit cabin crew credentials on a European Gulf corridor in an 8-month period. The sophistication of the uniform reproductions was increasing. She recommended updated authentication protocols for crew manifest editions at CDG and other high-traffic European hub airports, specifically biometric cross-referencing of charter add-ons against the crew licensing database. She also noted, in the section for field observations that did not fit the standard form categories, that the carrier, Sandra Voss, age 41, former secondary school teacher, no prior criminal record, had cooperated fully once the credential was shown, had provided the contact's description without significant prompting, and had wept, quietly and without apparent attempt to conceal it, for approximately 4 minutes during the formal charging procedure, after which she had straightened and answered every question put to her in a clear voice. Miriam did not include this last observation in the final report. It belonged to the category of things that were true and that a record should not erase but also could not hold. Theo texted his wife at 12:44 a.m. that he would be home Thursday. She sent back a photograph of their daughter asleep with a stuffed rabbit, which was not information about Thursday but was information about something more important, and he looked at it for a long time. In the hotel room adjacent, Miriam closed the laptop and sat for a moment in the dark before the window. The city below was all light, white and gold and the particular blue of hotel pools, and somewhere below in it, in a room she had never seen, a woman who had spent 11 days walking in circles around a dining table was sitting with what she had done. The diamonds were in an evidence bag in a room 2 terminals away. They were not beautiful under the fluorescent light. They were not beautiful in the evidence bag. They were 43 pieces of uncut carbon from the earth beneath Botswana, moving through a chain of human decisions. Some legal, some not, some desperate, some deliberate, toward whatever they would become, which was, for now, evidence. Miriam opened the window. The November air came in, warm by European standards, carrying jet fuel and the salt note of the Gulf somewhere beyond the city lights. She stood at the window for a while, doing nothing in particular. Outside, on the tarmac, Air Liberté 7714 sat at its stand. Ground crew moving around it in their yellow vests. The jetway retracted, the cabin dark. In a few hours it would be refueled and reconfigured and would lift from this runway again carrying a different manifest of lives in one direction or another, and no one on that flight would know what had happened on this one, and that was the nature of all of it. The way the world keeps moving through its own stories, each one invisible to the others, each one mattering entirely to the people inside it. The coffee on the desk had gone completely cold. Miriam left it there and went to sleep.